Carbonari, Italy's forgotten revolutionaries and their secret oaths, explained. Imagine a secret that spread like wildfire through the forests of Italy. A brotherhood whose members met in the dead of night, deep within the woods, their faces hidden by shadow and their identities protected by sacred, unbreakable oaths. They were not mystics or alchemists. They were revolutionaries, and their secret society was an underground army, a ghost network dedicated to a single, dangerous dream, a free, united, and independent Italy. They called themselves the Carbonari charcoal burners. Their rituals were strange and symbolic, their hierarchy complex, their influence immense. For decades, they were the most feared secret society in Europe, a name whispered with terror by the kings and emperors who ruled Italy, and with hope by the common people who yearned for liberty. But who were they, really? Were they the heirs to the Knights Templar, the godfathers of the Mafia? Or were they simply a forgotten flame, a dream of revolution that burned brightly and then vanished into the smoke of history? This is the story of the Carbonari, Italy's secret revolutionary brotherhoods. To understand a secret society, you must first understand the world that made it necessary. To find the origins of a brotherhood that met in the darkness of the forest, we must begin with the nation that did not yet exist. We must travel back to the turn of the 19th century, to the land that was home to the ghosts of Caesars and the genius of the Renaissance, but was not yet a country. A place that the great Austrian statesman, Prince von Metternich, would later dismiss with a contemptuous wave of his hand as nothing more than a geographical expression. This was Italy. For more than 1,000 years, since the fall of the Roman Empire, the Italian peninsula had been a fractured dream. The memory of unity was a distant, literary one, a whisper from the pages of Dante or a cynical prescription in the writings of Machiavelli. The reality was a complex, chaotic, and often brutal patchwork of competing states. It was a land of division, defined by fierce local identities and ruled by a collection of petty monarchs, foreign dynasties, and an ancient, implacable clerical power. In the south, there was the sprawling, impoverished kingdom of Naples and Sicily, ruled by a cadet branch of the Spanish Bourbon dynasty, a court known for its decadent splendor and its profound neglect of its people. Stretching across the center of the peninsula from Rome to Bologna were the Papal States. This was a unique and bizarre entity in European politics, a kingdom ruled directly by the Pope, not as a spiritual leader, but as an absolute temporal monarch. It was a state governed by cardinals, where religious law was state law, and where progress was stifled by a deep-seated theological conservatism. The north was a mosaic of smaller states, but it was dominated by a single, formidable foreign power. The rich regions of Lombardy, including the great city of Milan and Venetia, the heir to the glorious old Republic of Venice, were under the direct, iron-fisted control of the Austrian Habsburg Empire. The Grand Duchy of Tuscany was ruled by a Habsburg archduke. Other states, like the Kingdom of Sardinia-Piedmont in the northwest, were independent, but lived under the constant looming shadow of their powerful Austrian neighbors. This was Italy, a land of ancient culture, but of no political unity, a nation in spirit but on the map, a collection of pawns in the great chess game of European power politics. For centuries, its fields had served as the battlefield for the dynastic ambitions of France, Spain, and Austria. Its people were subjects, not citizens, ruled by kings who often did not speak their language and who answered to foreign capitals in Vienna or Madrid. The dream of a single, free, and united Italian nation seemed more distant than ever, a fantasy for poets and madmen. And then, from across the Alps, came a whirlwind, a force that would shatter the stagnant, decadent world forever. The French Revolution of 1789 was more than just a political event. It was a philosophical explosion. It unleashed upon Europe a new and intoxicating trinity of ideas: liberty, equality, fraternity. It was a declaration that sovereignty resided not with kings or popes, but with the people themselves, with the nation. These ideas were carried across Europe on the points of bayonets, by the armies of the man who was both the child and the master of the revolution, Napoleon Bonaparte. Beginning in 1796, Napoleon's armies swept into Italy. The campaign was a military and political blitzkrieg. The old, sclerotic monarchies crumbled before him. The Austrian armies were driven back. The Pope was humbled. In a matter of a few years, Napoleon redrew the entire map of the peninsula. He swept away the ancient patchwork of states and replaced them with new, larger, and more rational political entities, like the Cisalpine Republic and later, the Kingdom of Italy. He imposed the Napoleonic Code, a modern, secular legal system that replaced the tangled mess of feudal and clerical laws. He reformed the administration, built new roads, and introduced a more efficient system of taxation and conscription. But Napoleon's most important import was not a new law or a new map. It was a new idea. For the first time, a generation of young, educated Italians were exposed to the revolutionary concepts of nationalism and popular sovereignty. They saw, for the first time, a large part of the peninsula united under a single government, with a single army flying a single tricolor flag. The Napoleonic Kingdom of Italy, though a French puppet state, gave them a tantalizing taste of what a unified nation could be. A new class of Italian administrators, officers, and intellectuals began to think of themselves not as Tuscans or Neapolitans, but as Italians. The national consciousness, dormant for centuries, was violently reawakened. But the dream quickly soured. The liberator revealed himself to be a new master. Napoleon's rule was also a new and often brutal form of foreign domination. The new Italian states were plundered to fund his endless wars. Their museums were looted, their art treasures shipped off to the Louvre in Paris. Their young men were conscripted into the Grande Army and sent to die on the frozen plains of Russia. The French, who had come promising liberty, were now seen by many as just another set of foreign occupiers. And in this crucible of hope and disillusionment, a new kind of opposition began to form. Open political dissent against the powerful Napoleonic state was impossible. To speak of true Italian independence was treason. If patriots could not organize in the open, in the coffee houses and public squares, then they would organize in the shadows. The ancient Italian tradition of the secret society, a tradition that stretched back through the Masonic lodges of the Enlightenment to the craft guilds of the Middle Ages, was reborn. But it was reborn with a new, urgent, and explicitly political purpose. These would not be societies for philosophical debate or mystical speculation. They would be networks of revolutionaries, clandestine cells dedicated to the overthrow of tyranny, whether it came from the old monarchs or the new French emperor. Across Italy, but especially in the turbulent south, these secret brotherhoods began to multiply. They gave themselves exotic, symbolic names. The Guelphs, the Adelphi, the Philadelphi. But one society, born in the Kingdom of Naples, would soon eclipse all the others in its size, its influence, and its romantic, mysterious appeal. It would take its name, its complex symbolism, and its refuge from the deep, dark, and trackless forests that covered the mountains of southern Italy. It was a society that would become the most powerful revolutionary engine of its time, a name that would be whispered with fear in the palaces of kings and with hope in the hearts of patriots. They would call themselves the Carbonari charcoal burners. Every secret society cloaks itself in a mythology. To give itself weight, to inspire loyalty, to create a sense of belonging to something ancient and profound, it must invent a sacred history. The Carbonari, born in the crucible of the Napoleonic Wars, was no different. Their origins are deliberately obscure, a tangled forest of myth and historical speculation, a past designed to be as trackless as the woodlands where they met. According to their own foundational legends, their roots stretched back centuries. Some tales claimed they were descended from a secret fraternity of charcoal burners in medieval Germany, who had offered refuge to a Scottish king. Others claimed a more holy lineage, tracing their origins to Saint Theobald of Provence, a French nobleman who had renounced the world to live as a hermit and charcoal burner, and who became their patron saint. Still others whispered of a more dramatic inheritance, that the Carbonari were the secret, surviving heirs of the Knights Templar, the great medieval order of warrior monks who had been brutally suppressed by the Church, and whose secrets had been passed down in the shadows ever since. The more prosaic, historical truth is likely more recent. Most scholars believe the Carbonari first emerged as an organized force in the Kingdom of Naples around the year 1806. They were almost certainly an offshoot of Freemasonry, which had become a powerful vehicle for liberal and Enlightenment ideas in the 18th century. Many of the early Carbonari were also Masons, but they were a new and distinctly Italian evolution. Where Freemasonry was often philosophical, deistic, and largely confined to the educated urban elite, the Carbonari were explicitly political, deeply and deliberately Christian in their symbolism, and socially more diverse. They drew their members from a wider pool of discontent. Junior officers in the Napoleonic armies who felt their patriotic ambitions were being thwarted, liberal-minded nobles, intellectuals, students, and even a significant number of priests who dreamed of a reformed and more national church. And they chose for themselves a name and a symbolic universe that was both practical and deeply romantic. They were the Carbonari charcoal burners. It was a brilliant choice. The real Carbonari, the charcoal burners of Italy, were a class of men who lived on the margins of society. They spent their lives deep in the forests, far from the cities and the reach of the state's police. Their work was essential but obscure, slowly and carefully transforming wood into the charcoal that fueled the nation's fires. They were a perfect metaphor for a secret, revolutionary network that was working patiently in the shadows, slowly. The Carbonari adopted the world and the work of the charcoal burner as the central, organizing metaphor for their entire secret system. It was a rich and complex symbolic language that veiled their true political purpose. Their secret lodges, their meeting places, were called barack, the Italian word for huts. The area outside the lodge was referred to as the forest, a place of wolves and danger, representing the profane, uninitiated world. The lodge itself was the Carbonaro, the place where the charcoal was made. A gathering of lodges was called a forsta or forest, and their local cells were known as vendite, literally sales, as in a place where one would sell charcoal. The members of the fraternity did not call each other brothers, the common term used by Freemasons. They chose a term that implied an even closer, more secretive, and more binding relationship. They were buoni cugini, good cousins. They were a secret family, bound by blood and by oath. To become a part of this family, to be accepted as a good cousin, was to undergo an initiation, a powerful piece of ritual theater designed to test the candidate's courage and to bind him to the order with an unbreakable vow of secrecy. Imagine a young recruit, perhaps a student from Naples or a junior officer from Milan, his heart filled with a vague, romantic patriotism. He is approached by a friend, a good cousin, who sponsors his entry. On the appointed night, he is taken to a remote location, often deep within a forest. He is blindfolded, his hands are bound. He is being led from the darkness of the profane world towards the light of the order. He is led into the baraka, the hut. The room is dark, lit only by a few candles. It is arranged to represent the universe. He can hear the hushed voices of the other cousins around him. He is presented before the leader of the vendita, the Grand Master. He is subjected to a formal interrogation, a catechism of questions and answers designed to test his character and his commitment to the ideals of liberty and virtue. His journey is a symbolic one. He is made to pass through representations of the elements. He might stumble through a symbolic thicket of thorns, representing the difficulties on the path of virtue. He might be made to pass near a fire, representing the purifying flame of the order's work. Then comes the climax of the ceremony. The oath. A dagger or a hatchet is placed in his hand. He places his other hand upon a sacred object, often a crucifix, and he is made to swear a terrifying, blood-curdling oath of loyalty and secrecy, an oath that made clear the deadly consequences of betrayal. The exact wording varied, but a surviving version gives a sense of its chilling power. I swear and promise on the general statutes of the order, and on this steel, the avenging instrument of the perjured, to keep scrupulously the secret of the Carbonari. If I perjure myself, I consent to have my body cut in pieces, then burned, and the ashes scattered to the wind, so that my name may be held in execration by all the good cousins spread over the face of the earth. After swearing the oath, the blindfold is finally removed. His first sight is often the image of the crucified Christ. The Grand Master explains to him that the work of the Carbonari is to continue Christ's work of liberation, to free mankind from the tyranny of kings and priests. He is now taught the order's secret signs of recognition, the complex handshakes, the subtle gestures, the coded passwords. These will allow him to identify his fellow good cousins in the profane forest of the outside world, and to gain entry into other vendite. He has now been reborn. He is an apprentice in the first degree of the Carbonaria. He has entered the secret family. The order structure was hierarchical, likely with at least 2, and sometimes more, distinct tiers. The vast majority of members, the apprentices, were initiated into this first degree. They were taught that the order's purpose was a general one, to uphold the Catholic faith, to promote liberty, to help the oppressed, and to fight against tyranny. These were noble but deliberately vague goals. The true, ultimate aim of the Carbonari was a secret reserved only for those who proved their loyalty and worth, and were initiated into the highest degrees, the masters. This secret was politically explosive. It was the complete expulsion of all foreign powers, particularly the Austrians, from Italian soil. It was the abolition of absolute monarchy and the establishment of a liberal, constitutional government. And for some, it was the most dangerous dream of all, the creation of a single, unified, independent Italian republic. This was the great secret of the Carbonari, a secret so treasonous that to possess it was to risk one's life. And it was the secret that would fuel the first great wave of revolution to sweep across the Italian peninsula. The fall of Napoleon in 1815 was, for the absolute monarchs of Europe, a moment of triumph. At the Great Congress of Vienna, the old order was fastidiously put back together. The clocks were turned back. The revolutionary ideals of liberty and nationalism were to be scrubbed from the continent like a dangerous stain. And nowhere was this restoration more complete or more suffocating than in Italy. The Austrian Habsburg eagle once again sank its talons deep into the north. The Spanish Bourbons were restored to their throne in the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily. The Papal States were returned to the absolute rule of the Pope. The brief, intoxicating dream of a united, modern Italy was over. A new era of intense political repression began. Censorship was tightened, Secret police networks were expanded, and any whisper of liberalism was ruthlessly silenced. But you cannot kill an idea simply by restoring a king to his throne. The spirit of revolution, once unleashed, did not die. It went underground. And in this new climate of renewed tyranny, the secret brotherhood of the Carbonari did not just survive. It thrived. The secret huts of the charcoal burners multiplied in the political darkness. The Carbonari exploded in popularity, becoming the single most important and widespread revolutionary network in Italy. Its ranks swelled with all those who had been disillusioned by the Restoration. Liberal nobles, discontented merchants, students who had read the forbidden works of the French Enlightenment, and, most crucially, a large number of junior and mid-ranking officers in the restored armies. These were men who had served under Napoleon, who had been exposed to modern military organization and the ideal of a national, rather than a dynastic army. They were now forced to serve reactionary kings, and their resentment festered. The Carbonari became a vast, underground nation, a secret republic of patriots. Its membership reached, by some contemporary estimates, as high as 300,000 men. It was a powder keg, a revolutionary engine, patiently waiting in the shadows for a spark. In 1820, that spark came from across the sea. A liberal revolution in Spain had successfully forced their Bourbon king to accept a modern, written constitution. The news electrified the Carbonari lodges of Italy. If it could be done in Spain, why not here? The time to act was now. The first flames erupted, fittingly, in the Kingdom of Naples, the original heartland of the Carbonari. On July 1, 1820, a group of about 100 junior army officers and Carbonari members from the town of Nola, led by a priest and a lieutenant, raised the Carbonari flag, a tricolor of black, red, and blue, and marched out of their barracks, declaring their intention to secure a constitution. What began as a small mutiny quickly snowballed into a full-scale revolution. As they marched towards the city of Avellino, their ranks swelled with other disaffected military units and civilian Carbonari. The revolutionary momentum was unstoppable. The army's most respected senior general, a Napoleonic veteran named Guglielmo Pepe, who was himself a high-ranking Carbonaro, defected to the revolutionary side, bringing with him a large contingent of troops. The Bourbon regime, rotten with corruption and utterly lacking in popular support, crumbled with astonishing speed. King Ferdinand I, a cynical and cowardly ruler, saw that his own army would not defend him. Terrified of sharing the fate of the executed French king, Louis XVI, he capitulated almost immediately. On July 13, just 2 weeks after the first mutiny, King Ferdinand stood before his court and swore a solemn, sacred oath upon the Bible to uphold a new, liberal constitution modeled on the popular Spanish one. The Carbonari had won. They had, in a nearly bloodless revolution, transformed an absolute monarchy into a constitutional one. The news from Naples sent a shock wave of jubilation and hope across the entire peninsula. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed that the tide of history had turned. The Carbonari were hailed as heroes, the liberators of their nation. Inspired by the Neapolitan success, the good cousins in the northern kingdom of Piedmont decided it was their turn. In March of 1821, another Carbonari-led insurrection, again led by army officers, broke out in Piedmont, demanding that their king also grant a constitution. The revolutionary tide seemed to be sweeping all of Italy. But the kings and emperors of Europe watched these events with growing alarm. The Holy Alliance, the great pact between the absolutist monarchies of Austria, Prussia, and Russia, had been formed for precisely this reason, to crush any outbreak of revolution, wherever it might appear. The Austrian Chancellor, Prince Clemens von Metternich, the arch-architect of the Restoration, saw the constitutional government in Naples not as a legitimate political development, but as a dangerous disease that threatened to infect the entire continent, and most pressingly, Austria's own Italian possessions. He would not allow it to stand. At a series of international congresses, Metternich skillfully manipulated the great powers, securing a mandate for Austrian intervention. King Ferdinand of Naples, a guest at the Congress of Laibach, cynically betrayed his own people. He secretly pleaded with the Austrians to invade his kingdom and restore him to his absolute power, renouncing the very constitution he had sworn on the Bible to defend. The fate of the Neapolitan Revolution was sealed. In March of 1821, a massive professional Austrian army, 43,000 strong, marched south into the Kingdom of Naples. The Neapolitan Revolutionary Army, though filled with patriotic fervor, was a house divided. It was poorly equipped, internally split between moderates and radicals, and led by generals who were no match for the seasoned commanders of the Habsburg Empire. The two armies met at the Battle of Rieti. The result was a swift and catastrophic defeat for the revolutionaries. The Neapolitan forces disintegrated. The Austrian army marched into Naples unopposed. The short, hopeful Neapolitan spring was over. The same grim fate befell the revolt in Piedmont. It too was quickly and brutally crushed by royalist troops, supported by an Austrian contingent. The tide of revolution had been turned back with terrifying force. The aftermath was a brutal white terror. King Ferdinand, now safely restored to absolute power by Austrian bayonets, unleashed a wave of savage retribution. The constitution was abolished. The secret police were given free rein. The Carbonari were hunted down without mercy. Special tribunals were set up, and thousands were arrested. The leaders of the revolt were publicly executed. Hundreds more were sentenced to long, horrifying terms of imprisonment in squalid dungeons, many destined to die in chains. The great network of the Carbonari was broken. Its leadership was decimated, dead, imprisoned, or, like General Pepe, forced to flee into a long and bitter exile. The society that had come so close to liberating Italy was now a shattered and persecuted remnant. The dream for a time was dead, and in the silence of the prisons and the shadow of the gallows, a new generation of patriots would have to ask themselves a hard question. Why had they failed? Failure is a harsh but powerful teacher. The crushing defeat of the revolutions of 1820 and 1821 was a moment of profound trauma for the Italian patriotic movement. The Carbonari, the great secret brotherhood that had held the hopes of a nation, had been shattered. Their leaders were dead or in exile, their network broken, their name now synonymous with a glorious, but ultimately tragic, failure. In the silence that followed the Austrian cannons and the hangman's noose, a generation of survivors was forced to conduct a painful and searching postmortem. Why had they failed? They had the numbers, the dedication, the courage. Why had their great revolutionary engine stalled and broken apart at the first sign of serious resistance? The answers they found would not only explain the Carbonari's downfall, they would provide the blueprint for a new, more potent, and ultimately more successful form of revolution. The forest had failed. It was time for its heirs to step into the light. The critique of the Carbonari model was twofold. First, its greatest strength, its secrecy, had also been its greatest weakness. The society was a labyrinth of complex rituals, passwords, and hierarchical degrees. This was effective for evading the police, but it was disastrous for creating a unified political force. The vast majority of its members, the apprentices in the lower degrees, were never told the order's true, ultimate aim, the unification of Italy. They were motivated by a vague, localized discontent with their rulers and a general desire for liberty. When the critical moment came, they lacked a clear, unifying national vision to fight for. Furthermore, the strict secrecy prevented effective coordination between the different Vendite, or lodges. The Neapolitan rebels and the Piedmontese rebels acted almost entirely independently of each other. There was no central command, no unified strategy. It was a vast army with no general staff, a series of isolated fires that could be extinguished one by one, rather than a single, all-consuming conflagration. The second, and perhaps more profound, weakness was its social exclusivity. Despite being more diverse than Freemasonry, the Carbonari was still fundamentally a middle-class and aristocratic movement. It was led by army officers, lawyers, and liberal nobles. They failed to connect with, or even to trust, the great mass of the Italian people, the peasants in the fields and the urban poor. They dreamed of giving a constitution to the people, but they never truly tried to make the revolution of the people. And so, when the Austrian armies marched in, the revolutionaries found they had no broad base of popular support to fall back on. They were a revolutionary army without a nation to defend it. Out of this crucible of failure and analysis, a new leader would emerge, a man who would become the philosophical soul of the Italian unification. His name was Giuseppe Mazzini. Mazzini had, in his youth, been a Carbonaro. He had been drawn to its romantic mystery and its patriotic ideals. But he was also one of its victims. In 1830, he was arrested by the authorities in Piedmont, betrayed by a fellow member. It was during his months of solitary confinement in a fortress that he formulated his new vision for the Italian struggle. He reflected on the Carbonari's flaws with a critical eye. He saw their complex, symbolic rituals as child's play. He saw their lack of a clear, unifying ideology as a fatal error. And he saw their failure to engage the masses as a moral and strategic catastrophe. A revolution, Mazzini believed, could not be the work of a secret cabal whispering in the dark. It had to be a great national religious crusade, a holy war of the people for their own liberation. It needed a creed, not just a constitution. It needed apostles, not just conspirators. In 1831, living in exile in the French port city of Marseille, Mazzini founded his own revolutionary society. And its very name was a declaration of his new philosophy, La Giovine Italia, Young Italy. Young Italy was a radical departure from the Carbonari model. While it still required its members to be secret for their own safety, its program and its goals were completely public. Mazzini was a brilliant propagandist. He published a journal, also called Young Italy, which was smuggled back into Italy and distributed throughout the peninsula. The message was clear, direct, and inspiring. The first article of the Society's creed left no room for the vagueness that had plagued the Carbonari. It stated that Young Italy was Republican and Unitarian. Republican because it believed all sovereignty came from the people, not from kings. And Unitarian because it believed Italy must be a single, unified nation, one, independent and free. Mazzini replaced the Carbonari's Catholic symbolism with a new religion of patriotism. He spoke of Italy's mission, its divine destiny to lead the oppressed peoples of Europe to liberty. He spoke of duty, of sacrifice, and of martyrdom for the national cause. His famous motto was Dio e Popolo, God and the people, a potent fusion of religious fervor and democratic idealism. Membership was restricted to those under the age of 40, a deliberate attempt to break with the old generation of failed revolutionaries and to harness the energy and idealism of the youth. Young Italy was a stunning success. It spread rapidly, attracting tens of thousands of members. While its own attempts at staging uprisings were largely failures, its true impact was ideological. Mazzini, through his endless writing and organizing, had created the new intellectual and moral framework for the Italian Revolution. He was the heir who had stepped out of the forest and into the public mind. If Mazzini was the soul of the new revolution, its sword would be another former Carbonaro. Giuseppe Garibaldi, the charismatic guerrilla warrior who would become the most famous Italian of the 19th century, also began his revolutionary career in a Carbonari lodge. As a young merchant sailor in the 1830s, Garibaldi was initiated into the Carbonari's secrets. It was there that his patriotic passions were first ignited. He later joined Mazzini's Young Italy and participated in one of its failed insurrections in Piedmont, an act for which he was sentenced to death and forced to flee into a long exile in South America. It was there that he would hone his skills as a brilliant and unconventional military commander, skills he would one day bring back to fight for the cause he had first embraced in a secret ceremony as a young man. The Carbonari as an organization was dying, its methods superseded, its name becoming a relic of a past failure. But its spirit, the revolutionary fire it had so carefully guarded in the dark, had not been extinguished. It had been passed on to a new generation. The heirs of the forest had learned its lessons. They understood that a nation could not be freed by secret handshakes and whispered passwords alone. It required a public ideal, a national creed, and the passion of an entire people. The Carbonari had been the necessary first step, the romantic, tragic, and indispensable dream that had made the future reality of Italy possible. History is rarely a clean story. A movement, when it dies, does not simply vanish. Its structures can be repurposed. Its methods can be imitated. Its ghost can linger, sometimes taking on a new and more monstrous form. The Carbonari, the great revolutionary brotherhood, had passed its patriotic torch to the new generation of the Risorgimento. Its political purpose was fading, but did its organizational DNA survive in another, darker form? As the Carbonari network was being dismantled by state repression throughout Italy, another, very different kind of secret society was beginning to coalesce and grow in the south, particularly on the turbulent and deeply traditional island of Sicily. It was a brotherhood that also bound its members with terrifying blood oaths. It also demanded absolute secrecy under penalty of death. And it also defined itself in opposition to the official distant state. But its purpose was not the liberation of a nation. It was the control of territory, the enforcement of a brutal private justice, and the pursuit of profit through intimidation and violence. This was the organization that would come to be known as the Cosa Nostra, the Mafia, and the question that has haunted historians and criminologists for over a century is a tantalizing one. Was this a coincidence? Or is there a dark, hidden connection between the charcoal burners and the men of honor? Did the death of one secret society help give birth to the other? On the surface, the similarities are striking. Both the Carbonari and the early Mafia were highly ritualistic, hierarchical, secret brotherhoods. The Carbonari initiation involved a blood oath, a catechism, and the introduction to a secret symbolic language. The classic Mafia initiation ceremony, as later described by informers, was eerily similar. The recruit would be led into a secret room. His finger would be pricked, and a drop of his blood would be smeared onto a sacred image, often a picture of a saint. The image would be set on fire in his cupped hands, and as it burned, he would swear his oath of loyalty, his omerta or code of silence, a vow to belong to the honored society until death. The Carbonari called their members good cousins, creating a fictive, secret family. The Mafia would refer to itself as Cosa Nostra, our thing, and its members would become men of honor, part of a family or casca that demanded a loyalty far greater than that owed to the state or even to one's own biological family. Both organizations were a state within a state. The Carbonari sought to be a secret, revolutionary government that would one day replace the existing monarchies. The early mafia sought to be a secret, parallel government that controlled local territory, bypassing and often supplanting the official state's control over justice and commerce. They taxed farmers, enforced contracts, and settled disputes with their own brutal, unwritten laws. The theory of a direct connection is a compelling one. The argument goes like this. The Kingdom of Naples and Sicily was the great heartland of the Carbonari. The society was more widespread and deeply rooted here than anywhere else in Italy. When the revolutions of 1820 failed and the Bourbon state began its brutal crackdown, the Carbonari network was shattered, but not entirely destroyed. The revolutionary political leadership was imprisoned or exiled, but the structure remained. The local vendite, the cells of sworn members, the methods of secret communication, the culture of secrecy and opposition to the state, these things survived. But now, without a unifying political goal, this surviving structure, it is argued, mutated. It evolved. It turned inward from national politics to local power. Instead of fighting the tyranny of the king in Naples, it began to focus on controlling the local economy. The network that was once used to spread revolutionary pamphlets was now used to enforce protection rackets. The daggers once consecrated to the liberation of Italy were now used to eliminate business rivals. The grand, romantic dream of the Carbonari, in this view, degenerated into the grim, pragmatic reality of organized crime. Some early mafia groups were even referred to as Carbonari by local authorities, suggesting a perceived link at the time. However, many historians are deeply skeptical of this direct lineage theory. They argue that while the similarities are interesting, they do not prove a direct descent. The mafia, they contend, had its own, distinct origins, born from the unique social and economic conditions of 19th-century Sicily. Sicily has a long, tragic history of being ruled by a succession of distant, foreign powers. This bred a deep and profound distrust of the official state. The state was not seen as a protector or a source of justice, but as an alien, predatory force to be resisted, cheated, and ignored. In the absence of a trusted state, Sicilians relied on their own networks, the family, the village, and private forms of justice and protection. The rise of the mafia in the 19th century is tied to the abolition of feudalism. The old nobles lost their legal control over their vast agricultural estates, the latifondi. This created a power vacuum in the countryside. A new class of violent entrepreneurs, the men who would become the first mafiosi, stepped in. They were the estate managers, the private guards, the middlemen who used intimidation and violence to control the land, the water rights, and the labor of the peasants. In this view, the mafia's ritualism and secrecy were not inherited from the Carbonari. They were simply a natural and common feature of Sicilian fraternal organizations and religious confraternities. The blood oath was not a political invention. It was a powerful traditional way of binding men together in a dangerous enterprise. The mafia, then, was not a mutated Carbonari. It was a homegrown product of Sicily's own violent and tragic history. So what is the truth? Was there a direct link? It is a question that may never be answered definitively. There was no formal handover, no moment where a Carbonari lodge voted to become a mafia family. Perhaps the most plausible answer lies somewhere in the middle. It is unlikely that the mafia is a direct, linear descendant of the Carbonari, but it is highly probable that the two movements cross-pollinated. The widespread presence of the Carbonari in the South certainly helped to create and sustain a culture of secret, oath-bound societies in opposition to the state. It's possible that former Carbonari, disillusioned with revolutionary politics, used the skills and networks they had developed to create new criminal enterprises. And it's possible that emerging mafia groups simply borrowed or adapted the potent rituals and symbols that the Carbonari had made so famous. The Carbonari set out to create a new, unified Italy, but their legacy may have been a dual one. In the North, their spirit helped give birth to the noble, patriotic movement of the Risorgimento. But in the South, their ghost may have lingered in the shadows, their methods and their culture of secrecy inadvertently contributing to the rise of a darker brotherhood, a legacy that would continue to haunt Italy for another 200 years. The forest of the good cousins may have given root to a very different and more poisonous kind of tree. And so we arrive at the end of the forest path. We have followed the good cousins from their secret huts to the heart of a failed revolution, and we have traced their ghost into the very foundations of modern Italy, and perhaps into its darkest corners. We are left with the final accounting. Who were the Carbonari in the end? And what is their ultimate place in the long, passionate, and often bloody story of the Italian nation? If you measure a movement solely by its immediate practical success, then the Carbonari must be judged a failure. Their great uprisings of 1820 and 1821, the moments of their greatest power and influence, were utterly and brutally crushed. Their dream of a constitutional monarchy, let alone a unified republic, was extinguished by the cold, professional steel of the Austrian army. Their vast, secret network was dismantled, their leaders executed or driven into exile, their name becoming a byword for a brave but doomed romanticism. They were, in many ways, a transitional form, a bridge between two different worlds of revolution. They were the last great flowering of the 18th century model of the secret society, with its Masonic roots, its elaborate rituals, its complex grades, and its carefully guarded hierarchical secrets. But they were ultimately ill-suited for the new realities of 19th century politics. Their deep-seated secrecy prevented mass mobilization. Their complex and often confusing symbolism obscured their political goals. Their internal divisions and lack of central command made them incapable of mounting a coordinated, national struggle. They were a necessary failure, a grand, tragic experiment whose flaws would provide the crucial lessons for the next generation. The future of the Italian Revolution belonged not to the secret rituals of the Carbonari, but to the public ideology of Mazzini and the popular warfare of Garibaldi. But to dismiss them as a mere failure is to miss their profound and indispensable historical role. For 2 crucial decades, in an Italy suffocated by despotism and foreign rule, when all other forms of political opposition were impossible, the Carbonari were the sole keepers of the revolutionary flame. In their torchlit barack, in their clandestine city lodges, they created the only free spaces on the Italian peninsula. They nurtured the dream of a free and united Italy when, in the outside world, such a dream was considered treason. They were a vast, underground university of patriotism. They took hundreds of thousands of men who thought of themselves as Neapolitans or Lombards or Sicilians, and through the power of a shared oath and a secret identity, they taught them to think of themselves first and foremost as Italians. Their strange and theatrical rituals were not just child's play, as Mazzini would later dismiss them. They were a powerful form of political and psychological conditioning. Imagine the effect of the initiation ceremony. It took the abstract Enlightenment ideals of liberty and virtue, and it made them real, tangible, and deeply personal. The blindfold, the journey through darkness, the blood oath sworn on a dagger, these were not empty gestures. They were a rite of passage that symbolically killed the fearful, obedient subject of a king, and reborn him as a committed, sworn soldier in a sacred, secret war. The Carbonari gave the Italian Revolution its first army of true believers. The Carbonari as an organization faded away. By the time Italy was finally unified in the 1860s, their name was already a relic of a bygone era. But their spirit was everywhere. The men who made Italy, Mazzini, the prophet, Garibaldi, the soldier, Cavour, the statesman, were all, in their own ways, heirs of the forest. They had learned from the Carbonari's mistakes, but they were also inspired by their courage and fueled by the national consciousness that the good cousins had so painstakingly nurtured in the darkness. The Carbonari are a forgotten flame. They were a secret brotherhood born in the woods, whose revolutionary dream was ultimately consumed by the very fire it had helped to ignite. Their name has been obscured by the more famous names of their successors, and perhaps tainted by a possible shadowy connection to the criminal fraternities that followed. But their legacy is written into the very fabric of modern Italy. They were the first to prove that a national, patriotic movement could take root across the entire peninsula. They were the first to shed blood on a large scale for the ideal of a constitutional Italy. They were the romantic, tragic, and indispensable dreamers whose failure made the eventual, pragmatic success of the Italian nation possible. They were the secret, shadowy grandfathers of Italy. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the secret world of the Carbonari. Their story is a powerful reminder that the great movements of history are often born in secret, in the quiet, dangerous spaces where a few dedicated people dare to dream of a different world. What do you think of the Carbonari? Were their methods justified? And what do you make of their possible connection to the mafia? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy these explorations into the secret societies and forgotten histories of the past, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Driftwood Histories for more tales found adrift in time. We are grateful for your support. Until next time, stay curious.